Our next speaker is a Rice graduate and former naval officer who served as a submarine commander in the Antarctic, representing Veterans for Peace. He's here to speak to us about indefinite detention and the National Defense Authorization Act. Please give a warm welcome to Grant Youngman.
I thought after all these inspiring speeches tonight that I would simply read all of the NDAA. Has anybody here read the entire NDAA? No. Anybody not know what it is? Has anyone actually read Section 1021 in its entirety? A few. Has anyone read the authorization for the use of military force? A couple. I could read that whole thing tonight. It's only a page and a half. And it is the document that was an act that was enacted after September 11th that the people who support Section 1021 of the NDAA refer back to, that grants the President the power to indefinitely detain or basically do anything he wants to anyone in the interest of fighting the war on terror. The authorization for the use of military force actually makes no reference to indefinite detention or detention of any kind, because it's moot on that subject and gives the President tremendous powers to do whatever is necessary to fight the war on terror. Many people consider Section 1021 of the NDAA, and Section 1021 addresses detention and addresses terror, acts of terror, the war on terror, that it gives the authority to 1021 for this indefinite detention. The NDAA in 2011, the first time affirmed the right to hold suspected terrorists or supporters of terrorists indefinitely and without charge. And at issue, or the primary issue, is whether or not U.S. citizens can actually be detained. This year's Senate bill says that citizens can't be detained in the U.S., but it's unclear whether they can be detained somewhere else. I mean, can you detain them in Puerto Rico if you can't detain them in the U.S., or in Cuba, or someplace that's not part of the U.S. law? So on January 3rd this year, Obama signed the 2013 version of the NDAA. Attempts were made to clarify this whole issue of indefinite detention, specifically related to U.S. citizens. Senator Feinstein and I think the other gentleman that sponsored the bill was Hill. There was an amendment that was passed 90 whatever it is to 0 by the Senate to limit the ability to detain U.S. citizens under Section 1021 of the NDAA. The problem is that the Constitution applies to persons in the U.S. and not just U.S. citizens. That means it applies to everyone here. It doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or a legal resident or you just came across the border from Mexico. The Constitution applies to you if you live here. And so there was some concern that the Feinstein Amendment would actually create issues with people who are not citizens relative to indefinite detention. Ultimately, the amendment was dropped, and the President signed the 2013 NDAA, as is, still being extremely vague on whether or not U.S. citizens can be detained at all, and can be detained indefinitely. There was an additional section kept, I probably had the number somewhere, lost it, Section 1029. added a provision that related to habeas corpus for persons within the U.S. so that you could at least be brought up before a judge. But it didn't address the provisions for detention. It doesn't address the lack of formal charge. It doesn't address jury trials. It doesn't address any other protection offered anyone in the U.S. under the Constitution. So the NDAA is vague on the entire issue of the detention of U.S. citizens. The courts have ruled against, have stayed the ruling, have done basically nothing at this point that clarifies the issue. And so you have a lot of lips moving on the subject, but nothing concrete has happened with the whole notion of indefinite detention, specifically of U.S. citizens. And we have, I mean, that's not the only problem. We have detainees in Gitmo, we have detainees and foreign prisoners, in foreign prisons in Europe and that part of the world. And none of this has been addressed, other than the fact that the president can basically do what he pleases at this point. He can also order the Gitmo detainees home. He can bring an end to indefinite detention, and he can simply not enforce provisions of the bill which might cause the detention of U.S. citizens, which he said in his signing letter to the 2012 bill that he would not enforce, or he would do so judiciously or only under very rare circumstances or something. I don't have the exact wording here. But in his signing letter to the 2013 version of the NDAA, he didn't address indefinite detention at all. So the real issue is that it's vague. We don't know whether we can be detained or not. Odds are we can at this point. It's a bad thing. And it's just two little parts of a 500 and almost 600-page act. They're just two sections that are the real problem. The rest of it is budgets and veterans things and other stuff. So, that's it.